Hello, and welcome to today's Poison Center webinar, where we will explain some of the new changes and functionalities in our IT tools. So today, from our agenda, you can expect to hear more about the latest developments in the tools and just in the PCN project in general. My colleague Claudia Rimondo will also explain a little bit about some of the upcoming changes, in particular the disabled submissions, and how and when to use this and the cease product functionality more appropriately. My colleague Daniele Ape will also explain when and how to make a group submission. Towards the end of the webinar, we will have some closing remarks, and we will share a few take-home messages before we open up the webinar for questions. If you do have any questions, please join the Q&A slot at slido.com, and you can use the event code on the screen. You can send your questions from 12 to 1 Helsinki time, and we will reply to those questions that are within scope up until 2 o'clock. If your question isn't answered, please do make contact with us. As usual, the video recording from today, plus the presentations and Q&A will be available from our ECHA website. Of course, one thing I would like to point out as well is that all of our recorded material, including the webinars, are available in our YouTube channel. And there is also an auto-translate for subtitles, which you may find helpful. So now I would like to share some of the latest developments from the Poison Center team. What I will cover in my presentation today are a bit of an update on the submission numbers, as well as look at some of the October release features. Also some issues that we have seen reported, as well as an update on member states and help desk, plus a new recent campaign that we are running with consumers about the UFI. So firstly, on submission numbers, we have in the last year seen close to 2 million successful submissions to date. And you can see from the graph that the peak was before the first compliance date. Now this figure has now stabilized to around, well, just over 100,000 submissions per month. And submissions here means initial and updates. From a geographical perspective, the top 5 market areas that are receiving the most submissions are Italy, Germany, France, Poland, and Portugal. Okay, let's take a quick look at some of the new features since October. So on the 26th of October, version 4 of the PCN format was released in conjunction with the latest version of Euclid. So the latest features that I would like to share with you are we have a new update, well, we have several new update reasons, one of them being the cease product from the market. And this will be explained later in the presentation. Also explained later in the presentation is a bit more about how to make a group submission. Another change is the possibility to now indicate a multi-component product identifier, if of course that is relevant to your product type. There have been changes to the European product categorization system, as well as new and modified validation rules. Finally, I would also like to say that the HTML report has now placed the PDF report. As always, we have a PCN practical guide which has been updated to support you with these features, plus all of the other features, which I have not covered in detail here today. If you would like to see more about those, the rest of the features, we have already presented this recently at our Safe for Chemicals conference, and I would like to recommend that if you would like to learn more about it, you can watch the presentation or visit the slide set as well. But what about future improvements? Are there going to be more? Well, I have to say that the PCN IT solution is now moving to maintenance mode. And this is because it is now considered to host all the features that can support you as a notifier to be compliant. It also means that less resources will be allocated to future improvements, but there will be some improvements, bearing in mind that only major feedback will be addressed. My next topic is looking at some of the identified issues that we have seen. So I'd say the first one is this use or maybe misuse of the standard formula tick box. As you may know, a standard formula tick box should only be used for specific components that are listed in Annex 8, and these are for construction products or fuels. Now, previously, we have understood in some notifications that companies have misunderstood the use of the standard formula tick box. So when you tick this tick box, it then waives certain validation rules, in particular with regard to the mixture composition. Now, when you are declaring concentrations in a poison center notification, it must be in line with tables 1 and 2 of the annex according to a specific hazard class. So if you incorrectly use this tick box, it means that notifiers can possibly mistakenly report concentrations outside of the allowable limit. So now we have introduced a new validation rule, and this checks if the standard formula tick box has been marked. If it's been marked, then you also need to specify the name of the standard formula you are referring to. Now, why is this an issue? Well, it's a particular issue in update notifications, where once the initial notification had passed, may now be failing. So how do we fix this issue? Well, firstly, you need to check if it really is a standard formula component. If it is, then you just need to add the correct name, and this is easy to do from a little available pick list. Of course, if it isn't a standard formula component, then you need to deselect the standard formula tick box in the mixture composition document, and then you need to go and check the compositional data. It could be outside of the allowed range. If you've used a wider concentration than what is allowed, you will trigger a business rule. However, you can just make that range narrower without failure. The second issue that I would like to address here is the mixture-in-mixture supplier. So with the October release, we have also introduced a new quality check that looks at the MIM supplier and checks if it is EU-based. Why? Well, this is to assist authorities in case they would like to further follow up on the composition of that MIM. Now, if you are an EU importer of a MIM or a mixture for further formulation, then you need to consider whether or not you need to notify that imported mixture, plus in addition to your own final product. Okay, so the third issue, and we've had a few questions about it, is the HTML report. Now, this has completely replaced the PDF report, which is now obsolete. Why have we removed this PDF report? Well, firstly, maintaining two different reporting tools has been shown not to be very efficient. And the HTML report is the same report that is used by authorities, and we found that it's proven to be less error-prone. In addition to this, it also has an improved reporting format, so it allows you to report or include in the report all of the provided information. The HTML report also has an enhanced visual representation and organization of information. One other thing to bear in mind is that it's possible to download the whole file as a PDF still, and you can also report just sections of that file for confidentiality reasons. You can just check in your browser settings. So, a brief look at an update of where we are with our member states. Indeed, we still expect all member states to use ECHA's systems. Now, currently, there are still 6 member states that are remaining to be onboarded. They are either onboarded, but they're not ready to accept for maybe some technical reasons, or they are still in the process of onboarding. Now, if you do need to make a submission to one of these member states, you still need to submit a harmonized submission, but you need to do it through the national channels. In this case, you can always contact the appointed body for more details or visit their website. And some great news that I'm delighted to share with you today, the Belgian appointed body, also representing Luxembourg, is onboarded and aims to be accepting from January next year. Another area I would like to touch on is this event in the submission report which describes when a dossier has been received by a particular member state. So this event is generated when the dossier becomes available to the appointed body. Now, in most cases, this event it is generated in different moments in time, but most often it is usually instantaneous. In some cases, it can take up to 24 hours. And this could be because there has been a delay due to a peak number of submissions going through at that time. Now, if it is longer than 24 hours, it could be a possible technical issue. And in this case, you can contact ECHA. One thing to mention here really is that if you do notice some sort of a delay, please do not resubmit the dossier. Also, it is interesting to note that it is possible to see the event dossier received, even though the appointed body may not be accepting dossiers. And a classic example here is with Belgium. Now, please, I remind you to check the member states overview table to see when you can place your particular product on the market. My next topic is on the ECHA Help Desk and some of the changes that are going about. So now we are recommending to all EU and non-EU customers who are coming to the ECHA Help Desk to, of course, go to the National Help Desk as a first point of contact. This is particularly for regulatory questions and in some cases, some technical support as well. The ECHA Help Desk is now redirecting any customers with these regulatory questions to the National Help Desk. But in terms of technical support, we still remain fully available. Of course, if you have any questions regarding to national procedures, such as onboarding or information about fees, then we would redirect you to the national appointed body. And finally, just a few slides on this eufy campaign for consumers that we are currently running. So the eufy really does matter. And the reason is that poison centres have only a few minutes to identify the exact product, assess the information, and provide a rapid response in the event of an incident. And the eufy really does help to support this process. It's now our goal to educate consumers about the eufy, why it exists, which products contain it, where to find it. And for this, we have created a consumer site. Now, this site contains a lot of educational information, which is available in all EU languages. We've also got a Eufy animation there, plus an example label as well to demonstrate where you can find the Eufy and, of course, what the Eufy looks like. But of course, we don't get a lot of consumer traffic to our Poison Centre website, so we really need to reach further. And to do this, we have kicked off a social media campaign, or rather a challenge, where we challenge people to find Eufy on the products that they have at home. And this challenge will run up until the 10th of December. We are working with our stakeholders, member states, as well as institutional and national influencers. And we really want to spread the importance of this message and share it on social media. So for this, we have created a campaign page where we have a toolkit with all of the visuals and post materials translated so you can download and share. So I warmly welcome you to join us in our campaign, Eufy Matters EU, to help make it a success. That concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Hello, I'm Claudia. I work in the Submission and Processing unit in ECHA. And this presentation will give you more information about two of the main upcoming changes in the realm of the Poison Centre IT solution: the seizing the product from the market and the disabling submission features. In particular, this presentation will cover the business requirements that are behind the seizing a product from the market feature and the requirements that relate to the disabling a submitted dossier feature. And then the presentation will focus on the IT solutions that have been put in place to address those specific requirements. Let's start first with the business requirements that are behind seizing a product from the market. The requirements here are mainly the fact that industry wants to be able to indicate that a mixture is no longer marketed in one or multiple market areas. At the same time, poison centers still need to be able to access the information about the seized products, because even though those products start being seized, they can still be available in sub-cabinet in the households, and therefore they can still be cause of poisonings even after they have been seized. And that's why they need to be able to access the information about the seized products. Also, appointed bodies need to have access to the information on the seized products because they need to be able to perform toxicovigilance activities. Having said all that, we have to remember that seizing a product from the market is a voluntary option, as there is no legal basis to support this requirement. When thinking of how to design the IT solution to support this business need, we also had to take into account that when industry notifies a mixture, the information organized in the dossier can describe different products. And therefore, industry need to be able to indicate which exact product is no longer placed on a certain market area. And that brought us to identify several scenarios where this situation, where we can have this situation. For instance, if industry has notified to 3 market areas, they may need to decide to seize all the products from only one of those market areas. Or they can decide to seize all the products from all the market areas. But then we can also have a hybrid scenario where industry wants to seize some products from some of the market areas. Moving now to the description of the business requirements behind the disabling submission feature, we have to acknowledge that in the last year, we have received several requests from industry users to cancel, to delete, to remove dossiers from the ECHA Submission portal. However, ECHA cannot do that. First of all, because dossiers are submitted by industry and ECHA cannot delete something that was submitted by somebody else. But also because the ECHA Submission portal dispatches those submitted dossiers to appointed bodies and poison centers. And that's why the ECHA Submission portal itself cannot delete them, cannot remove them. However, by reading this feedback that we received by the industry users, we identified several use cases where disabling a submitted dossier could be useful. In particular, we got informed about cases where industry had notified a wrong UFI, and that UFI could not be deleted or fully replaced because of the existing validation rules that are in place when you submit an update. It also happened that industry had notified to one market area by mistake and needed to disable this submission to avoid paying fees that maybe that the member state was applying. It also happened that industry wanted to provide a more accurate information or wanted to correct the already notified mixture composition, but this is not possible due to the existing validation rules that inform the sameness of the components and the allowable ranges for changes in the existing concentration. It happened also that industry submitted a new notification of the significant change of composition instead of an update of an existing notification that had the same composition though. And it happened as well that industry submitted by mistake a test dossier containing fake information in the production environment of the ECHA Submission portal. And therefore, test dossiers were dispatched to appointed bodies and poison center. Based on these use cases, the business requirements have been drafted as follows. Industry needs to be able to disable succeeded submissions, and this information should be propagated to the downstream systems that consume the information from the ECHA Submission portal. That is, appointed bodies and poison centers. But also industry needs to be able to keep track of their disabled submissions. On the other side of the equation, appointed bodies and poison centers need to be able to identify the disabled submissions so they know that they don't have to take them into account in their day-to-day tasks. It is also to be taken into account that disabling a submitted dossier is a voluntary action. There is no legal basis to have this as a legal requirement. And there are important consequences for companies when they decide to disable a successfully submitted dossier. Now, before going into the details of the IT solutions that support these requirements, it is extremely important to highlight that seizing a product from the market and disabling a submitted dossier are very, very different business requirements. There are very different business needs behind this feature. As a consequence, also the IT solutions that have been put in place to address these business needs are very different. We will see in the next slides the details of these IT solutions, but it is important already now to stress that seizing a product from the market is something that you can do using the latest PCM format version 4 that was released at the end of October this year. And in order to be able to seize a product from the market, the submission of a new dossier is required. For disabling a submitted dossier, the solution is very different. You don't have to rely on the PCM format because this feature is available in the ECHA Submission portal. And as a consequence, there is no need to submit a new dossier. Let's go now into the details and let's see how to indicate in the PCM dossier that a product has been seized from the market. When you prepare your PCM dossier, you can create as many product information records as you need. In the latest PCM format, for each product information record, 2 new lists have been made available in the market placement section. One list is the active market list, and here you have to select all the countries where you want to keep your notification. The second list is called seized market, and here you have to indicate the countries you want to seize your product from. You can repeat this operation in all the relevant product records, and that depends on how you want to organize the information around your products. Then you have to remember to adapt also the information in the dossier header. Here you will still have one single list with all the countries where the notification is meant for. And in this list, you have to include the sum of the countries that you have indicated in the active market list in the product information record, as well as the countries that you have selected from the seized market list. After that, you have to indicate the proper reason for updating. 2 new reasons for updated have been included in the latest PCM format. Whenever you want to seize a product from the market, the related justification needs to be selected. But if after some time you decide that you want to replace a product from the market, you can indicate that in the second reason for updating that has been included in the PCM format. Also bear in mind that it is possible to indicate both justifications in the same dossier. And this was done in order to address the level of granularity that I described in the previous slides. Appointed bodies and poison centers will have access to the full dossier. That means that they will have access to the full set of information that you include in the PCM notification. Therefore, they will be able to see all the details that you have included in the product information records, as well as the reasons you have included in the dossier header to justify your updates. So they will basically see everything you have included in the dossier to indicate whether or not a product has been seized from the market. And let's move now to the IT solution that will allow you to disable successfully submitted PCM dossiers. Before moving into the description of the flow that you will have to follow to disable a submission, It is important to highlight that to be able to disable a submission, 3 conditions need to be met. Only succeeded submissions will be disabled. Failed submissions are not dispatched to appointed bodies and poison centers, and therefore they do not have any impact on the downstream systems. Also, only the latest valid submission will be disabled. That is important, especially in case of several updates. And in that case, only the latest update can be disabled. And if you submit an initial submission and you immediately want to disable it, that will be possible, provided that you have not submitted updates in the meantime. The third condition is that it is possible to disable only your own legal entity's submissions. Based on that, it will be possible in the ECHA Submission portal to disable a submission from the submission report of the submission you want to disable. Next to the submission status, once the conditions mentioned in the previous slide are met, you will find 3 dots. And when you click on those 3 dots, a new option becomes available, the option Disable Submission. When you click on that option, you access a new page in the ECHA Submission portal, a page called Disable Submission. In here, the system will ask you if you're sure that you really want to disable that submission. And so that you don't lose track of the submission that you really want to disable, you will always have its submission number in front of you. Also, the system will ask you to indicate the reason why you want to disable that submission. And you will be given at least 4 options for the time being. Most importantly, the system will display a disclaimer warning you that if you indicate that your submission is disabled, you are saying that that submission is not relevant for any regulatory compliance purposes. And you will need to tick that disclaimer to acknowledge that you are aware that choosing to disable your submission may have negative regulatory consequences for your company. A more extended, more elaborated description of the consequences of disabling a submission is included in the latest version of the terms and conditions that you will be asked to accept as soon as the disabling submission feature becomes available in the ECHA Submission portal. After you have selected a reason for disabling a submission, and after you have ticked the disclaimer, the button at the bottom right corner will get enabled, and only then you will be able to confirm that you want to disable a submission. When you click on the Disable button, a technical request to disable a submission is sent to the system in the background. You don't see it, but the system treats this request as a kind of submission. And the outcome of this request will be reflected in the outcome of the status of the disabled submission. That is something you need to take into account, that you need to remember when you land on this page, where the system informs you that your request to disable a specific submission is being processed. In this page, you will keep seeing the submission number of the submission you want to disable, as well as the submission number of the request to disable that specific submission. So from now on, these two submission numbers, the submission number of the disabled submission and the submission number of the request, will be always displayed together. You will end up having two submission reports. One submission report for the disabled submission and one submission report for the request to disable that submission. In the submission report of the disabled submission, next to the submission status, you will find a new label, disabled, for the submission. And you will also find a new icon. That same icon is used in the submission graph and in the submission history to indicate a disabled submission. In both the submission graph and the submission history, you will also find the submission number of the request to disable the submission. But you will be able to distinguish it among the other submissions because a new icon has been introduced to mark it as just a request. Finally, in the submission report of the disabled submission, in the area where the submission events are displayed, you will have the information about the date and time when the submission was disabled. When it comes to the submission report of the request, in the submission information section, you will still be exposed to the submission number of the submission you decided to disable. As I said before, these two pieces of information will be always linked from now on. And you will also find information about the reason you had selected to disable that submission. The submission graph and the submission history will be adapted as per the submission report of the disabled submission. And what is important to highlight here is that the recipients indicated in the submission report of the request are retrieved from the submission that you want to disable. That means that once you decide to disable a submission, the submission gets disabled in all the countries that you had indicated in the submission you want to disable. There is no possibility to indicate that this submission is disabled in some countries but still valid in others. Once you disable one submission, that submission gets disabled in all the countries where this had been previously notified. Finally, also the search page of the ECHA Submission portal will be adapted so that new search criteria can be included to allow you to filter in or out the disabled submissions. So you will be able to choose whether you want to have the disabled submissions visible in the search results or not. Just bear in mind that in the search results, the requests to disable a submission will be visible as well, but you will still be able to distinguish between the submissions and the request to disable them by looking at the relevant icon that has been introduced to indicate a request to disable a submission. It is important to remember that when you disable a dossier, these dossiers still remain visible and accessible by the appointed bodies and the poison centers. However, those same dossiers are marked as disabled. So appointed bodies and poison centers do have the information that those dossiers have to be considered as not valid. And in particular, the dossier marked as disabled will be displayed in the HTML report for those appointed bodies and poison centers using the PCN database. This feature will already be available in December this year. And the dossier marked as disabled will be available also for those appointed bodies using e-delivery or the secure folder package. This feature will also be supported from December this year. We plan to also improve the search criteria used by appointed bodies and poison centers in the PCN database so that they can more easily filter out the search results, including or not the disabled dossiers. But this will come a bit later in 2022. And finally, when we talk about when this new feature becomes available, we have to distinguish, because for the ECHA Submission portal users, this feature becomes available in December this year. Whereas for the system-to-system users, this feature becomes available in summer 2022. The reason for this delay is the fact that to be able to support the disabling submission feature for the S2S users, an update of the application programming interface, the API, is required. Currently, we are running with version 3 of the API, whereas this disabling submission feature will be included in version 4 of the API, and that will be released in summer 2022. And the companies will have the possibility, therefore, to disable submissions only after they have adapted to the API version 4. That means that in between December 2021 and summer 2022, if a submission gets disabled from the submission portal manually, no information can be communicated via the system-to-system service before API version 4 is in place. And that concludes my presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Hello everyone, welcome to this new PCN webinar, also from my side. My name is Daniele Ape and I'm part of the ECHA Poison Center team. In this part of the webinar, we will talk about the group submission option. So I will explain you what the group submission is, when can be used, and which information requirements apply, and which are the criteria that should be met in order to be able to make use of this option. And I will explain you also why you should use it and why it can help in certain situations. So then we will go through some practical aspect of the preparation of a group submission, and we will explain how the validation works in case of a group submission. So first of all, what is a group submission and when is a suitable option? So the group submission is an option which allows a single submission to cover multiple mixture composition. And this is possible when the differences are limited, but still the mixture compositions cannot be considered as the same composition. I want to underline that this is not new from a legal perspective. So the provision for the group submission, they were included already in the first version of Annex 8. There were a few small changes introduced by the amendments, but the group submission per se was already an option since the original version of Annex 8. The functionality in our submission system in the portal and in our format is new and is available only since October this year, so a few weeks ago. So which are the criteria that have to be met in order to be able to group mixture composition in a group submission? So the compositions, they have to be very much similar. And the compositions, they can they can differ only for certain components which are used only as part. So it means that the concentration, which can be exact concentration or concentration ranges for all common components, they have to be exactly the same. The different mixture of the group, they have to have the same classification for health and physical hazard, and all the mixture, they are placed on the market by the same submitter. So the principle of one submitter, one submission remains the same. Let's go a bit more in detail to understand how this difference in the composition can work. So the components which differ, so the part of the composition which vary across the mixture, can constitute only maximum 5%. So it means that minimum 95% of the mixture composition has to be common, has to be the same. It means that the components and their concentration, they have to be the same for a minimum of 95%. There is an additional facilitation in this group submission option, which is that the common, which is the perfumes, certain perfumes, they do not need the composition, the concentration. There can be perfumes also in the common part of the composition, and these are not counted in the 5% limit. So the 5% limit concerns only components which are not present in all the composition. It's very important that the final goal is always reached. So it means that relevant and useful information, they have to be provided for the poison center, for the appointed body. So it must be clear for which perfumes is present in which mixture composition. The different mixture composition, they have to be provided together with all the information which is required in Part B of Annex 8. So for each mixture composition, the submitter has to provide trade names, packaging information, information about uses, about physical states and characteristics, and toxicological information, and the classification. So that means that a group submission may very well cover mixtures which are placed on the market with different information, so with different trade names, different packaging, and so on. And in principle, also different toxicological information and environmental classification. So according to the legal text, this is possible, even if we assume that this difference will be limited due to the limited variability, the limited allowed variability across the composition. What is important to underline that all the mixture grouped in a group submission, they can be assigned one single UFI, if the submitter decides so, or they can be assigned different UFIs. Now, it is important also to keep in mind that all the normal standard rules apply. So the group submission is an option which allows you to group different mixture, but the components needs to be identified the same way as a standard submission. They can very well be substances or means, and these have to be identified. It is possible, if the specific criteria apply, to identify certain components with the generic component, identify perfumes or coloring agent. As we said, the difference is that perfumes which are not classified or are classified only for specific classes, namely skin sensitization or respiration toxicity, they do not need to have concentration if the submitter so decide. Now let's try to have a visualization of what the group submission is about. This picture does not necessarily reflect the actual format, but is to make a bit more clear what we mean with different mixture, which have to share 95% of the concentration. So in this picture, we have 3 different mixtures. And the first part, the upper table, lists all the components which are present in all the mixture of the group in exactly those concentration ranges. Of course, the submitter can decide to provide an exact concentration, otherwise they can decide to provide a range according to the relevant tables which are in Annex A of CLP. The second part of the picture, the table below, shows the component which are present in the specific mixture. So each mixture has a variable blend of component used only as perfumes, and those perfumes are not present in all the three mixtures, but they can be present in one or two of the three different mixtures. Now, of course, every component has to be identified according to the standard rules, and the classification of this component has to be provided, except for those perfumes that we have mentioned before. So how a group submission can eventually be practically prepared with this new functionality, which is available since end of October. So basically, first of all, after you have created a new dossier and you have selected the right working context, so the CLP Poison Center notification working context, you have the possibility now to tick the correct submission type, which is the group submission type, which is now available. This basically triggers a specific functionality and fields in the format that allow the creation, the inclusion of multiple composition document with the relevant information. So once you have created your group submission dossier, then you have to create and include each individual mixture composition document under the mixture composition record. There is a practical way forward. If you don't want to include one by one all the components for each composition, considering that 90% of the composition will be the same, it is possible to enter only the common composition once. You can create clones, as many clones as are the mixture you want to include in the group submission, and then add the specific component to each of these clones. How does this work? You have this drop-down menu with different options by clicking the three dots that you find on the top right corner in several parts of the dossier preparation. This includes the function copy data from, and this function actually allows you to copy data, not only composition, but data which is already present in other dossier, other data set that you have already created. So in this case, you can select the mixture composition from the same dossier that you are creating, and you can clone it, copy it as many times as you want. Now, it's very important that you indicate the function as perfumes to the relevant components. So all the components which are actually used as perfumes, they have to be indicated as such. In particular, the components which are not common, because only perfume can be included as non-common components. After that, you have to enter all the information for each single mixture as for any standard submission. The system allows you, of course, to reuse some of the record, but in particular, the product information, which has to be included for each single mixture composition, has to be linked to only one mixture. So each product record can be linked to one mixture composition, even if you can, of course, link more than one product record to each mixture composition. There is a new specific functionality now when since the group submission is available, which allows you to indicate, in case you are preparing a group submission, to indicate for each specific record, in this case the product information record, for which to which specific mixture applies. In case of product, you can select only one mixture composition per each product record. After that, you provide all the other information records which are required by Annex A, in particular the classification and labeling record, toxicological information record, pH document for each mixture. In this case, when the same information applies to all or some of the mixture of the group, you can link the same record to multiple mixture. Alternatively, you can create different record if the information was different and link to the relevant mixture the relevant information. For instance, if due to the differences in some of the perfumes, you have differences in the environmental classification. So then you may need a different classification and labeling record per each mixture. And again, you have a specific part of the dossier preparation of the format which asks you to specify to which mixture a specific record apply. Now, once you have prepared it and you want to submit, of course, you have the possibility to validate the dossier. The validation works in a little bit different from the standard submission. What it means that a specific set of rules has been created and has been associated to the submission type group submission. This new specific set of rules has been designed in order to check from one side some of the same information which is required for any submission, for any standard submission. So, for example, it will check that the correct information in the dossier header is provided, the information and the individual mixtures are provided according to the requirement of Annex 8, for instance, the allowed concentration ranges, and also that the required product information is there. But then we have a series of specific group submission requirements which have to be checked. And so there are specific validation rules which will check specific group submission requirements. For example, the minimum common composition or the components which are not present in all the mixture, they must be flagged as perfumes. Now, to have a better understanding of how all this works, I present you a summary of the differences between group submission and standard submission. For instance, while in the standard submission, you can provide only one pH record, because the mixture composition is one. In the group submission, the rules will check that at least one pH record exists. And if there is one or more, all these, they have to be linked to a mixture composition. So there should not be any orphan record. The same for toxicological information. For a standard submission, you can provide only one. It has to be only one. While for a group submission, you have to provide minimum one toxicological information. And if you provide more than one, then each of them, they have to be linked to a specific mixture composition record. The standard submission can contain only exactly one mixture composition, while for a group submission, the rules will check that at least two mixture composition exist, because the group submission makes sense only in case you have to group more than one mixture composition. Then for a standard submission, all components must have a concentration, while, as we explained earlier, or in the group submission, there is an exception for specific perfumes. So the specific rule will work in this case. Then finally, for the classification and labeling record, the same as we said before, for the standard submission, exactly one record has to be provided, while for a group submission, minimum one record has to exist. What happens in case of update? We have new justification reasons, and some of them, one of these is relevant for group submission, because you may have changes that do not require the new UFI. So, for example, every change, like in the standard submission, which does not affect the mixture composition, can be flagged as a normal update, and you will not need to, for instance, to change the UFI. In case of group submission, changes may concern perfumes, and when they concern perfumes only, you don't need to, for instance, you don't need to change the UFI, and you can submit a normal update. And then it is allowed to add or to delete mixture composition to an existing group submission. While for changes affecting the mixture composition, so all the changes in Part B.4 of Annex 8, the same as for the standard submission, they have to be flagged as new notification after significant change of composition, and the new UFI has to be provided. Of course, if these changes affect one of the mixture and not all the mixture, and this mixture does not meet anymore the criteria to be grouped together with the other mixture, then as a new standard submission for this mixture which has changed needs to be submitted. While if the same changes apply to all the mixture of the group, maybe a new UFI may be needed, but the group submission can remain. Now we know that there may be submission already existing for mixture, which may qualify for a group submission, but since the functionality was not available until October, these had to be submitted via standard submission. So in case the submitter wishes to group them and to submit now a group submission, we have to inform that there's no option to merge standard submission at the moment. So the way forward is to wait for the disabling functionality, which will allow to disable existing successful notification and then resubmit a new group submission grouping the same mixture. This is all from my side. So I will suggest you to have a look in case you have you need more information about group submission, to always check the additional support material that we provide on our website.
So that concludes today's webinar. We have now a few take-home messages that we'd like to share. From my side, if your dossier has not been received, we ask for your patience, but you can always contact us and we will investigate further if needed. Also, check our support material first if you have a question, because more often than not, the answer is usually provided there. If you need more specific advice, you first need to consider who is your first point of contact. And do join our UFI challenge on social media to help spread the message.
Consider the different business meaning of seizing a product from the market and disabling a successfully submitted dossier. These are very different business requirements, and different IT solutions have been put in place to address them. So use the proper IT solution according to your real business need. Remember that a disabled submission still remains accessible by appointed bodies and poison centers, but it is marked as disabled. Also be aware of the legal consequences that disabling a successfully submitted dossier may have for your company. And consider also that it will be possible to disable submitted dossiers in summer 2022 for those users relying on the system-to-system service.
So please consider the legal criteria when preparing a group submission. It's very important to keep in mind that due to the possibility to provide concentration ranges instead of exact concentration, and to not to provide a concentration for specific perfume component, only the submitter knows the actual common versus not common composition, and whether actually the common composition is minimum 95%. This is very important because you have to remember the objective of the legislation, which is to provide the poison center, the emergency responders, and the appointed body with reliable information, even if this cannot be automatically checked in the detail. Consider then in addition that you always have the possibility to opt for a generic component identifier option in a standard submission. So always consider which is the best option, which may be suitable for your case. And all these options are exactly optional and not mandatory. And then finally, my last take-home message is to always consider possible future business plan before choosing the submission option. And this applies not only for a group submission, but for other options, for instance, such as interchangeable component group. That's all. Thank you very much for the attention. And I remind you that if you have further questions, you have time until 1 to submit your question via the Slido tool. Alternatively, you're always free to send us questions via our contact form. Thank you very much.